This is the Southern California Committee for the World Parliament of World's Religions. And we were forged in 2008 after a group of people had been to the World Parliament of Religions in Barcelona and from Los Angeles. And those of you that have been to a parliament know how extraordinary the synergy and the expanse of that experience is, where we can be together for 4 or 5 days and really experience what this oneness is that we all talk about, and this plethora of different teachings and different offerings, and it's fabulous. And the next one to mention is in August in Chicago. Vivian, are you with the Parliament itself?
I wasn't. When the Parliament was in Toronto, I was in the steering committee.
Okay.
And I was on a lot of different subcommittees, like like the secret space. I can't remember all of them now.
You're a Parliament groupie like the rest of us. And thank you. I just could see the Parliament logos in the background. So thank you.
Oh, that's actually City Hall, Toronto.
Oh, that's Toronto. Yes, that's what I recognize. Yes. That was from, of those images from the Parliament there in 2018. And so the Southern California was formed by the group of people that came back to LA in 2008, so excited and like, what do we do now? And so Ruth here was one of the pioneering members of that Parliament group that started here with the official endorsement of the Parliament, and we even got to use the Parliament's name, Southern California Parliament of World's Religions. And Ruth was the co-chair, along with our beloved but late Dr. Joseph Prabhu, who we miss terribly. And Ruth was the chair there for 10 years. And I worked very closely with Ruth, and then I took over her role since then, 2008. And our group now is comprised, I think, of about 6 or 7 people. And we're always looking for members if anyone's interested in these activities. And we've recently been joined on our board by Quincy, who brings her magic and her deep, deep soul, and on this call, Rev Eric. And also to mention that Rev Shana was on the board many years ago, and so was Jasmine Haley on the board many years ago. Hi, Rev Shana. And so we've done some extraordinary events in Los Angeles. I think one of our highlight events was a program called Seeds of Peace, and we had Marianne Williamson be the keynote speaker at All Saints Church in Pasadena. And I think we had like close to 500 people at that event. But with the world being different now with COVID and us all meeting online, we were able to invite Rev Eric, who actually at the moment is living in Texas, to join us, because we'd had a conference, a Seeds of Peace online conference a year or so ago, maybe a little bit longer. And at the end of the conference, we stayed on to talk about, we've engaged in stimulating wonderful conversation, but now what do we go out and do? The being part is so very important, but there is the doing, the action part. And Rev Eric came up with an idea, and those of us on the board at the time thought this is it. And so we've adopted this as our initiative, which we're working on. And Rev Eric will lead us through that and open up to any questions afterwards. And maybe, Rev Eric, you can share with us the inception of it. But I'm so excited that Ruth gets to hear finally what it is we're doing. And Rev Shana, for that matter, too, and Jasmine, and Patrick Horn, who's incognito there as well. He's also been very much a supporter of our events, as so have the Alberts as well. We've been part of the NAIN conference with them. And so over to you, Rev Eric, and we've got until 4:00, and we'll close with a song if there's time at the end. Thank you.
I will endeavor not to build my soapbox too large or grab a megaphone too loud as I begin my pontification on something that I care so deeply about, cognizant of time. So before I dive into the presentation itself, just as a background of why this matters so much to me and where this idea came from, I, at a very young age, answered a family calling to public service, going back to the Revolutionary War. Ancestry.com is an amazing thing. Going back to the Revolutionary War, every member of my family has served in the military, including my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and both of my parents. And that was not something that I was going to do because my coming out process at the age of 17 was traumatic, and I wasn't going back into the closet. And at the time, don't ask, don't tell was the law of the land. And I wasn't going back in the closet. So I became a firefighter paramedic, and then I joined the Baltimore Police Department in Maryland and became a police officer and worked my way through the ranks there. And I had this incredible career where I was blessed with the opportunity to work in a number of different units and see a number of different facets of law enforcement. And at the end of my career, I was the captain director of media relations, and I served as the deputy chief of staff for the agency. And in that position, I had the opportunity to work with the police commissioner on policy initiatives to really reshape and reform what law enforcement looked like in the city of Baltimore. And we started out on the process of what we were then calling holistic policing, and really trying to look into the root causes of violent crime and what was at stake there. And unfortunately, the Freddie Gray riots came, and all of the work that we had been doing kind of threw that out the window. The police commissioner was fired, and I resigned in protest 4 days after that, and set out on a mission to align law enforcement with the communities that it's serving, because at the core of so many of societal issues is the criminal justice system, either in interdiction or mitigation. And in doing this research for a book I was writing at the time, I started to see some common threads that linked a lot of societal issues into crime, both on the front and the back end. And the more research I did on this, and the more people I talked to, and the more studies that we looked at, the more this idea started to germinate in my mind about what does a holistic approach to solving societal structural issues look like. And at the Seeds of Peace conference, I had one of those divinely inspired out-of-body moments where, as I was listening to people talk, I could feel my heart starting to race. And I was having this, the conversation is wonderful, but this is the group that can do something about it. And so in the out-of-body blurting that came out of my mouth, this idea of utilizing the interfaith capacity and structures that exist to have real impact on the societal and structural issues that limit opportunity, disadvantage so many minority groups, and limit the opportunity for people to be, as Trina said in that last session, to be fully human, because they're in survival mode, and they're in survival mode in systems that don't allow them to thrive. Interfaith ministries, faith-based ministries, have phenomenal potential to make a real change. And when you look at faith groups across the country, what you see is that almost all of them are involved in some sort of good works, whether it's food drives or food banks or educational opportunities. There's tons of good work that's being done, but it's all siloed, and it's not being harnessed and coordinated. And how it's being targeted is missing what research shows to be really great opportunities. And so what we have been working on for the last year and a half or so with SCCPWR is the opportunity to bring forward an awareness and training program to go into faith-based institutions to say, these are the root causes of some of society's greatest issues. And here's what we can do holistically to really sort of mitigate and blunt the impact of those issues. And so I just kind of want to very quickly walk through this idea that we've been working on, which is our healthy neighborhoods concepts, which is to build what we're calling nests, and that name will make sense momentarily. And so again, this is about our opportunity to harness the power of faith communities working collaboratively together in that interfaith capacity to enact systems of change for good. And as we start this process of opening this educational space, one of the things that's really important in the process is the understanding of where we've come from and the issues, having real conversations about the issues that we face, because as we start to dive into some of the issues I'm going to talk about, what you'll see is there's a nexus point that goes back to the founding of this country and how through hundreds of years of history, disadvantaging groups, whether it's in slavery or minority groups and ethnic groups as they began to immigrate into this country, built the systems that we operate in today, and that continues to cause serious ramifications for people down to the opportunities that they face as they attempt to lead their lives in society and engage with one another. Some of those laws that have impacted people are still on the books in some cases and make a lot of the work that we need to do really, really important. And we see the ramifications of not addressing those issues in such things as generational poverty and violence, where families over the generations are involved in a cycle of violence and incarceration. We see and recognize the growing wealth divide that takes place. And the very real, this summer is highlighting globally the very real issues that climate change represents. And the fact that our planet, the thing that supports all of us, is dying underneath of our feet. And now we have such limited time to take real change into hand to protect the future for the next generation. All of these things are present and manifest as struggles that we need to address. And there is no better force on earth to bring about societal change than faith communities. And so the reason that this is targeted towards faith communities is that there's already a spirit of engaged activism present in a lot of faith communities. There are already structures and phone trees and coordinating committees and the opportunity for these groups to already begin to work together, and to do so in an interfaith capacity only amplifies the ability of those groups to bring about real societal change. And so we get to the root of the binding tissue here, or the root of the issues. And our nest comes from 4 core categories that impact so much of civil society, and it's transportation, education, nutrition, and sanitization. And when you add the environmental concerns around that, which are manifest in everything from clean drinking water to the air we breathe to the earth that we live on, all of these things are interconnected and depend on one another. And when you look at generational poverties, generational violence, the issues that limit opportunities, stifle creativity, harm neighborhoods and families, you can trace lines back to these core issues. And so that's what we want to look at very quickly. And for me, it starts with nutrition. The access to quality food is something that is growing increasingly challenging for all Americans, particularly those that live in food deserts. And there are 40% of urban communities live in food deserts where they don't have access to high quality nutrition, where they're limited to what's available in corner stores or local carryouts or fast food, which we know has no nutritional benefits. And the failure to be able to provide good, healthy, high quality nutritional food to communities manifests itself in increased healthcare costs, behavioral issues, learning deficiencies. We know through empirical research that a hungry child is a child who cannot learn. Nutrition not only impacts brain development, but it also impacts attention in school. And so the cycle and the opportunity to get out of, to seize opportunities to grow out of poverty, to try to change your life, starts with what you're eating in the morning and your ability to go to school and be focused. And so nutrition is that kind of core issue. And as we're talking about students going to school hungry and what they're eating, we have to actually talk about our schools themselves. For me, one of the things that I was so proud of in the Baltimore Police Department was we enacted a program called Third Grade Reads, where police officers from across the city would go to third grade students and read books to them. Because what we know from Department of Justice studies is that 80% of children who can't read by the third grade are likely to end up in the criminal justice system. That's a clear metric between growth and opportunity or cyclical violence, cyclical incarceration. Our current educational framework is designed around a skilled labor force, which is not how human beings have been wired to learn for thousands and thousands of years. And the consequence of that is visible in student behavior in classrooms, the teaching to a test, the failure to ignite and the spark of the imagination to inspire children to grow. And so when you look at where our schools are ranked right now, especially graduation rates, 22 out of the top 27 nations, we like to think of America as being the leader of the world, but the reality is there are nations all across the globe who have figured out better educational models than the one that we currently have, which was designed at the time of the Industrial Revolution. And that's really what our educational system is focused on, as opposed to creating and fostering a culture of engagement and looking at different educational opportunities that are available for teaching the mind and heart. And so one of the things that we look at is, as trade schools are making a comeback in certain areas, you're seeing increased enrollment in those and increased opportunities. And so this is a core driver for what we know will impact somebody's ability to either be successful in the society that we currently live in or potentially end up in the criminal justice system. Sanitation isn't sexy. It's not one of those things that you're going to have a telethon for and everybody's going to sign up to donate to sanitation. But when we talk about the manner in which we deliver utilities, water and waste management and garbage management, you only have to look at Flint, Michigan to see the failure to invest in good sanitation systems, as clean water isn't delivered. And Flint is a harbinger of many more cities across the country. Chicago is a great example of a city that's using a water system that was designed 150 years ago. More importantly, though, there's a social aspect to sanitation. And when you go into neighborhoods that aren't well maintained, it devalues the property in that area. It decreases the morale of the people that live in that area. It limits the ability for other companies to want to come in and invest. Part of the reason why you have the urban food deserts that you have is because these stores look at the neighborhood and say, I don't want to put a store there. This store isn't going to attract the customers that I want because the neighborhood itself doesn't have the right look or feel to it. There's a great program called Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, or CPTED, which really started to look at these environmental factors. How clean is the neighborhood? And started to catalog through them and make these connection points between nuisance crimes and drug crimes and the cleanliness of a neighborhood. And one of the most incredible studies that they did was look at what's called an open air drug market. This was an intersection which was known to be a place where anybody could go and buy drugs. And the law enforcement agency responsible for that community had tried everything under the sun to eradicate the drug dealing, from aggressive enforcement to undercover enforcement, to undercover buys, everything that a police department can do. And they were never able to dislodge this drug network because it was so profitable. And they enacted a CPTED design. They literally put Jersey barriers down the center of the divided highway and planted flowers. And within 2 days of planting those flowers, the drug dealers packed up and moved out of the community, because the flowers sent the message that somebody was going to be taking care of those flowers. Someone was going to be in that neighborhood on a consistent basis, paying attention to what was taking place. And that was enough for them to say, this isn't where we want to be anymore. And so they packed up and they moved out. There are a lot of opportunities that we have in cleanups and beautification projects, developing gardens, community gardens in vacant lots that speak to nutrition and education and sanitation all at the same time. And the last of these core issues is transportation, which increasingly is starting to actually gain some traction as we look at electric vehicles and the surging price of gas. But as gas prices drop back down, this conversation fades to the background. But it's one that we need to have with earnest, because the society that we live in today, if you want to get a good job, if you want to be able to explore educational opportunities, if you want to be able to drive and get food, you have to have access to transportation. And when we look at our public transportation systems, a number of them were designed with redlining in mind. And that means that public transportation routes that exist in the year 2022 were designed at a time and a place where segregation was the law of the land. And you can see the direct overlay of redlining and segregated communities on the bus routes that exist today. And so children who have to take public transportation to school sometimes end up spending as much as an hour and a half out of every day on public transportation because of the failure in design of what those routes look like. If you look at those 40% of urban communities that live in a food desert, imagine doing your weekly shopping and having to carry all of that on a bus, and what that experience looks like, and how you would get all the groceries that you need for a week home as you're taking 2 different buses to the closest grocery store to you because of that urban food desert. We see cities in Europe and the Middle East and Asia that are investing in walkable cities, where communities are built around town squares, and jobs and nutrition and education opportunities all exist in those central town squares, and are seeing success from investing in that. In fact, there's this great study that says for every dollar that you invest in quality public transportation, for every dollar that you invest in quality public transportation, it returns $5 in economic value to that community that has that investment of that initial dollar. And so if we want to be able to provide quality nutrition, get people to educational opportunities, get people to the jobs that spark their interest and allow them to thrive as human beings, and to come home to clean neighborhoods, we've got to be able to make it possible for them to do that. And finally, we get to the environment itself. This summer has been an amazing opportunity to see the impact of drought conditions. I'm in San Antonio, and June is the rainiest month in San Antonio. It typically rains between 20 and 25 days a month in San Antonio. It has rained twice since May 1st in San Antonio. And one of those was yesterday, where we got about 4 minutes worth of rain. We are in what is called a super drought, which I didn't even know that was a thing, but drought wasn't intense enough. So now we're in a super drought, and that's just in my city. Lake Mead and the depletion of Lake Mead is making headlines every day because they're finding all sorts of inappropriate things in Lake Mead. And I say that sort of jokingly, but the reality is the fires that have consumed Europe, the drought conditions that are prevalent all across the equator, the rising temperatures, the oceans, the giant state-sized ice shelves that are cracking in half. All of these things are happening at a pace that's faster than anyone predicted that it would happen. And the downstream consequence of that on what we're talking about here, the failure to step in, the failure to begin to mitigate some of our own behavior on the environment, is going to play out in the increasing ferocity of the weather systems that we're seeing. And there's some great public reporting about that. But the point I want to make in the context of this program is, if you put yourself into the shoes of somebody who lives in a New Orleans or a Houston or somewhere on the Gulf Coast, who's already struggling with some of these issues that we've talked about, where you live in an urban environment with poor transportation, that's already has structures that are failing in terms of water delivery, has limited access to food, and a once-in-a-century hurricane comes through and decimates what little you already have, what does the rebuild look like from that? And so There's the global issue of our environmental care, and there's the very local issue of the increasing amount of damage recovery funds that will begin to deplete over time and lessen. We know that the poorest communities will receive the least amount of assistance. You only have to look to the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans to understand the real world ramifications of that. And so all of these issues are at the forefront and present, and they all interlink with each other. And I've tried to highlight that a little bit as I went through this presentation. But if you look at this chart, what you see clearly is that education is impacted by nutrition, sanitation, transportation, and trees. Trees are impacted by nutrition, education, sanitation, and transportation. All of these things impact each other. And so at the beginning of this, I talked about the good work that's taking place in interfaith communities already. But this is siloed work that we see. It's that individual book drive, it's that individual food drive. And what we have is an opportunity for interfaith communities to come together to start to collaborate and tackle the issues that are most prevalent in their communities. Every community is different. What the needs are in San Antonio are very different from the needs in Los Angeles and very different from the needs in Toronto. And so each community has its own needs, which means that the solutions to those needs, the dialogue that needs to take place around those needs is going to be different from interfaith community to interfaith community. But the nexus of how those things intersect remains the same irrespective of where you are. It requires planning. And if there's one thing that faith communities can be very good at, it's planning. Plan all kinds of events and have phone trees and are very good at putting together events for local faith communities. And so we can bring that same planning modality to an interfaith collaboration where interfaith groups have the opportunity to sit down, identify the needs that fall into the next categories, and start to identify how they as a group can tackle them. I am on a singular mission to tear silos down across the world. The more we can embrace the divine feminine and collaborate and work in cooperation with one another and kind of poke at the power structures, the happier I will be. But it also happens to be really beneficial in this process that by working in interfaith groups collaboratively, the manpower resources or she-power resources magnifies exponentially. You decrease the workload by spreading it out. You generate new ideas. You inspire other people to join into your group to be a part of that success, and that's very exciting. And because we do live in the world that we live in, much though I, in my imagination, have made it entirely different, that's not the reality that we live in. We live in a world where political power matters. And you go and talk to any local elected official and they'll tell you that they go and speak at faith communities because they know faith communities can deliver votes. And so that is an opportunity for faith communities, especially working together, to start to bring some of these issues to the forefront of elected leaders, because a faith community can come together and design community gardens, design nutritional educational programming, and work to create great after-school training and other opportunities for tackling FNS programs. But what you're not going to be able to do is interdict and change what the current bus routes look like in your community. You're not going to be able to shift where a highway is being built unless you join together collaboratively to be able to do the unified voice to speak to elected officials. And finally, there is the faith component to this. And for me, part of the reason why I fell in love with APDS and why I've dedicated my life to not only going through the APDS process, but becoming a member of the faculty and very proudly wearing my ordination stole from APDS is because for All Paths Divinity School, the process was about being the change, living that change in your everyday life. And whether it's in the conversations, those one-on-one conversations, or it's bringing about change that empowers each person to allow the divine nature that is inside of them to step forward and be manifest in their lived experience, it requires societal opportunity. You can't be starving, struggling, trying to figure out how you're going to make it through to the next week and have time to reflect on your relationship with God at the same time. we see that play out in the most disadvantaged communities across the globe. And if we who are privileged in whatever space and whatever part of our life can make somebody's life that much easier, give them that much more breathing room, that's bringing the change into reality in a lived basis in a way that will make an impact on people that matters in their lived experience. And that, to me, is the work of the divine. And that is what gets me very, very excited about this. So with that, I will get off my medium height soapbox and turn this back over to Rev Deb with thanks for the SCCPWR board for the opportunity to present this on their behalf.
As ever, Rev Eric, that was just a fantastic, fantastic presentation. You took this whole massive global intricacy and of the way everything, we talk in the interfaith movement, how interconnected we all are as faith communities, but you've been able to show us on this level of how society functions. And I don't think we often actually think of that we're dealing with the issues at the end result, of communities that are disparate and struggling, and we stand up and we show up for issues, but you're providing a vision and opportunity where we can actually go to the very root cause of these things and bring about change there. That is just tremendously, tremendously exciting. I just want to take this moment also just to Ruth, I'll hand over to you in just a moment, just to send greetings from Reverend Dr. Richard Rose, who unfortunately is the co-chair of this organization, but unfortunately could not make this meeting today. Something came up, so he does ask us to please send his apologies and his warm greetings. And so maybe we can just, Rev Eric, if you agree, and Quincy and Andre, we could just open up for some discussion and questions and go from there. And Ruth, your hand is up, and anyone else? Yeah.
That was magnificent, Eric. Here's what I've been toying with in the back of my mind the entire time while you were talking. The Chicken Little story, Chicken Little, the Sky is Falling. A friend of mine wrote a book called The History of the End of the World. And what he did was he went back in time and he chronicled all the moments when people predicted the end of the world, specific dates, and then how they amended the dates. And this took place over centuries. It wasn't just, recently. And so now when people speak of doom and gloom, I think there is a certain, how should I say, insouciance? I don't know, I don't really have the right word, but it's not totally indifference, but people don't really believe it's happening. That's one of the problems of why so little has been done until now. And what you mentioned about the rainfall in San Antonio and so forth, and the drought that's going on, and the higher temperatures in California and in the valley going as high as 110, we haven't seen that before. So maybe it's not possible to light this fire for, not the forest fire, but the kind of fire for change you're speaking of, unless we go through the actual understanding and deprivation and the higher gas price. We have to sort of, someone said, you can't shortcut a human experience to teach a greater lesson. There's no way to get around it. So it's tragic that we are in that position. But I just read a story about Medellin, Colombia, which used to be the home of a drug cartel. And they totally redesigned first of all, they got rid of the drugs, and then they totally redesigned their city, and they planted thousands of trees to create corridors, cool corridors. And, there are examples now that are popping up around the world. And maybe that's something that the interfaith community can get involved in too, of bringing those examples to our constituents, because it seems to me that unless the fire is burning outside your door, and even then, people still don't leave their homes sometimes. We know they stay in their homes, even though the fire is eating at their doorstep, right? So I don't really know how we get around that aspect of humanity, but I think that your principles of using the interfaith communities to teach these values are just incomparable. And that one of the things I'm seeing happening now, and maybe all of you are aware of this, what they call conscious communities, people who have left the grid. They don't want to be in society the way they have been until now. They want to have their own communities where they plant organic food, where they, in some cases, have their own livestock and kill it, and rather than going to someone else who's killed it, so that they are aware of the cycle of life when they're eating meat. You know, you see there's a network of conscious communities across the country. There are books, they have listings of all these places, and people go to conferences to see where they could possibly go to live because they're unhappy with this circumstance. So maybe that's a network that could be employed to be able to not to teach them, but to what do you call it, when you hitch also on the steam and the energy of that particular movement, because they already believe all the things that you've talked about, Eric. And I think this is the age of holy collaboration, of our looking for other organizations that may not have the exact same path. You know, it's almost like interfaith. We choose different ways to the holy, but in the end, we want to get to the holy. And so maybe there should be a way to adapt what we're doing in interfaith to what we're trying to do with climate, nutrition, transportation, sanitation. And by the way, I know I'm a little long-winded, but I want to just give you one example that when I was in India, that I found out that the most important innovation that Gandhi did for the people of India was to make sure there was toilets and sanitation all over the country. That became the defining moment of India's change and India's ability to pull itself up. Sanitation. So we have to treat that with more respect. Anyway, these are just thoughts I was having while you were speaking, but it's a really beautiful program, and I think we should consider more ways to make it viable.
So Ruth, you're excited. This is our initiative, our Southern SCCPWR, because it just gets to the core of things in a way that I certainly never understood the interconnection of these things in the way that is so very familiar to Rev Eric. I'm very.
And you know, I have a daughter who's been selling, harvesting and selling fruit in the farmers markets for the last 8 years in Northern California. And now she started bringing things down here to people as well. And I just see that in terms of her personal health and the way she sees the world and her relationship to people, when she's selling fresh produce to them, there's no substitute for that. You can't get that at a supermarket. I don't care how high class the supermarket is, you know. So that missing link of the person to person, and what the conscious communities are doing is saying, we want to do this ourselves. Some people are even having plans of having their own form of currency, of money, that they are a way of bartering and trading, so they don't have to be in the system that we see is corrupt and that has favored the wealthy. So it seems that all these things are happening at the same time. And the question is, where do we plug ourselves in to be the most effective? So those are just some of my questions that I'm asking, Eric, but thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. And do you have any response to what I said, Eric?
That's a dangerous question to ask me, because I can talk for like an hour and a half about this on just one topic. I will say this. My husband is first generation American. His family is from Haiti, and in 2016 I had the privileged to go to Haiti in July, which is when you should absolutely go to Haiti because it's not hot at all. And we were in a village about an hour outside of Port-au-Prince. And I found some of the most amazing, loving people that I've ever had the opportunity to spend a week with, in a village that had no running water, no electricity, nothing that you would recognize as being a part of the industrialized world. I will leave the details of sanitation and what that experience looked like to your very vivid imaginations. But what I will tell you is we were eating dinner one night that had been prepared over an open fire in the middle of the village. And this was before I became a vegan. And I turned to my husband and I said, "What is this that we're eating? It's delicious. I don't know what it is. What is it?" And he looked at his mom and said, "What is this? What are we eating?" And she laughed at us and said, "That's chicken." I was 40 years old and had never actually tasted what chicken tastes like before, because every experience I had had with chicken was from an American grocery store, which meant that it was pumped full of hormones and chemicals. And so it became this great dichotomy for me of a poverty that is indescribable and understandable without having experienced it, juxtaposed with the most healthy and nutritious food that's grown on the land, that's cultivated by hand on the land. And what a different world we could live in if we marry these two concepts together. So this conscious communities that are bringing some of that to the forefront is very exciting. You got me very excited about that. I'm going to be doing some adding to my forthcoming book about this. Thank you.
Anyone else? Quincy, do you want to just share quickly a little bit about who else put their hand up? I saw Cara and Patrick. Okay. But Quincy, if just a little bit to share about your engagement with this initiative as a board member.
Oh,
then we'll
my
go
goodness.
to you, Cara, and then Patrick.
What I find, what I find so exciting about this, I mean, the whole thing is tremendous, and the way that Eric has broken it down, and from his research and his experience in his life. And well, first of all, something new came up for me as you were sharing, especially with the very sexy sanitation subject. And I thought, it's so interesting because when we walk into a church, when we walk into a temple, when we walk into a spiritual structure of any kind, right? We just know to be reverent, to be quiet, to be respectful of others, of ourselves, of the space. I thought that was an interesting metaphor for what this is offering, is to really create that feeling in the community, right? To treat it like it's a sacred space. And then, the other thing is just my own personal journey with my own healing. And this sort of addresses what Ruth was talking about, I think, which is, when I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 12 years ago, it really brought me back home to my heart and to God and to my faith, right? And I had created this toxic environment by the choices I was making and the choices I wasn't making, and the consciousness I was living in and the unconsciousness I was living in. And, the way that the healing began for me, again, Ruth, this sort of addresses what you were talking about, was to take responsibility and really have to look at my part in creating this stage 4 cancer in my body. And I think that's what Ruth is, implying, is that we're having a hard time really taking responsibility and going, we're responsible for this, right? And so I just feel like I'm a walking example of this NEST program, where if you take responsibility and love and listen to your environment, treat it right, feed it right, you can align and clean it up. And here I am 12 years later without Western medicine, right? And because of my faith. So I feel like I'm this sort of like walking example of what you've described, you know, Eric. And I just think, Ruth, it addresses what you were saying. It really is. It's a tough pill to swallow for me to go, I made some really bad choices. And it was the integral part of reversing the cancer in my body. All these bumps popping up, all these fires popping up in my body, and then going away. Because I was able to go, I fucked up, you know, and I gotta do it right. I gotta change my thinking. And it was really rooted in my faith and God. So thank you, Deb, for asking me to share a little bit.
Thank you, Quincy. And Cara, you had something to share?
I think Patrick had your hand up before me. If you want to, I feel bad. But oh, okay. While you were talking about all of this, I tend to get very agitated when I start hearing this because I feel like I'm just so excited, but it all brings me back to I used to do advocacy work, teaching people to do citizen lobbying back in the day, like in the 2000s, late 2000s into 2011, 12. And I just remember working with the Jeffrey Sachs, Angelina Jolie, Bono crowd. And as I was doing a lot more reading, and I was working with a group that did what they called like the Navy SEALs of like, if you like, there's one campaign and then we would just go and develop these relationships and teach how to do that. And I loved that. I loved digging in. But at some point, all of the reading I was doing brought me back to World Trade, and that all these donations were giving. And I was learning from other people about the damage that was being done by going in and wiping out little economies by dumping, you know, and I started to learn all of this. And I had a representative in Congress who would give me books on these subjects. And finally, I went to our head legislative person, and he said, I said, why are we doing all of this? We're literally like trimming at the top of these problems when we could be getting under the root. And he just was like, I don't know what to tell you. We wouldn't exist if we started on that topic. We would get smashed. Like how can we teach people to have hope? And I said, you know, we always took pride in was not being the people who go and, you know, scream and yell, you know, we're going to go have meetings. And then I said, well, now I understand why people throw Molotov cocktails at the G8. Now I understand they're so frustrated. And I'm seeing that now with kids. And I think that they've heard so many times, oh, it's not the end. Oh, they thought it was the end of the world before. Oh, this, oh, that. And I hear them saying it to them. And I have these feelings of like, I think that one of the most amazing things we as interfaith people can do is to just keep affirming. Like watching your entire presentation just gave me so much hope. And then when you said politics, I mean, I live in the city of Los Angeles, and there's just, I mean, we've had Skid Row since the Great Depression. It's hard to have hope. But it's like, this is going to be the thing, because for anyone who's ever done this kind of work, coming up against what we're coming against now, our job as instillers of hope, of saying there is a candle still lit somewhere, there is hope somewhere. I have trouble feeling it myself. And I feel like this is another reason why to reach out to the faith communities. And anyway, sign me up, Eric. I will be in your, whatever you need. I am not joking. I want on board.
Your first convert, Eric.
I just say this about hope. On April 27th, 2015, I stood on the 9th floor of the Baltimore Police Department Watch Center, which had a 180-degree view of the city of Baltimore. And as far as I could see to the west, through the northwest, the northern, the northeast, and the east, I could see 100 buildings that were on fire, burning across the city. It was the first time the city of Baltimore had burned like that. There were more fires burning that night than in the 1968 riots, and the city had not burned that much since the War of 1812, when in September of 1814, the city of Baltimore was bombarded by British ships. I might love history a little bit. I had hope that night. I have hope now, because while the journey is difficult, the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice and hope every single day. And so we each play our little part. As inanely frustrating as politics and global trade and capitalism and commercialism can be, we all have to keep that hope alive. That's what drives us forward. All right, I'll stop talking.